I hereby sentence you to the sack. What's the sack? You're going to be flogged and beaten, then sewn into a sack with an animal. The animal could be a monkey, snake, or a chicken. After that, your beaten body, along with the animal in the sack, will then be thrown down a river. Judge, all I did was jaywalk. I do not make the rules. Don't do it. Don't do it. Here are the worst punishments in human history. Number 10. Using rats to kill people. In those ancient times, torturing or killing a person using rats, of all things, was one of the most favorable punishment methods. There was a thing called the rat trap, where a rat would be put inside a cage, and then the bottomless cage would be placed on a convict's body. The other side of the cage would then be heated, leaving the rat stranded and in a dilemma trying to find a way out. Since the other side of the cage is on fire, the only way the rat could escape was by eating away the victim's flesh to make a way for itself, thus leading to your death and a full stomach for the rats. How in the hell did someone even brainstorm this idea is beyond me. On some occasions, living rats would be inserted into your anus or vagina through a tube. These rats would then start to feed on the internal body organs, causing much pain for the victim and an eventual death. But knowing some humans in today's time, I'm sure some freaky ass dude out there would probably love to go out in this manner. Giggity. Number 9. The boats. Imagine getting tortured using milk and honey and a pair of boats. Now, I want you to use your imagination and try to think of how these three elements could possibly make a brutal combination. Go ahead, I'll give you a second. Now, if you're not a complete lunatic, 9 times out of 10, you probably wouldn't see how this could be that bad. But boy, would you be wrong. The victims of this toucher method would be placed in 2 hollowed out boats. Their heads and limbs would be sticking out and their bodies would be trapped inside. The victim would be forced to drink milk and honey, causing diarrhea. The diarrhea would then fill the boats. After that, the victims would have honey poured on their faces, and animals would arrive on the boat to not only feast upon the prisoners, but also enter their bodies to fatally eat them from the inside out. Number 8. Crucifixion. This is a popular one. If you can recall the story of Jesus Christ in the Bible and how he was crucified with 2 thieves, then I bet you know what we're just about to reveal. The crucifixion, or as I like to call it, the forbidden scarecrow, was very famous during the Middle Ages and was invented by the Persians in 300 to 400 BC and developed during Roman times into a punishment for the most serious of criminals. Offenses such as murder, rebellion, treason, religious transgressions, and often sometimes prisoners of war would often lead to this form of punishment. Suffocation, loss of bodily fluids, and multiple organ failure were just some of the symptoms one suffers before their free trial of life ended. The weight of the body pulling down on the arms usually made breathing very difficult for the individuals. Crucifixion involved 2 ways. One of the most severe methods of crucifixion was when the arms of the criminal were put straight above him. This actually led to a quicker death since it was impossible for the victim to breathe. The second one involved nailing the arms on the individual while stretched out on either side. But here the victim could stay alive for a little while. Though, most of the time their knees would be broken, leading to the whole body weight being brought down, thus breaking the shoulder joints and stretching out the ribs, causing suffocation and eventually death. But perhaps that's easier to bear than the next one on this list. Number 7. Impalement. Impalement by pole, pike, spear, hook, or stake was not only fairly common, it was also popular during the Middle Ages. Especially people convicted for treason or crimes against the state would be punished like this. And people did invent many devices to execute this method of punishment. What's more interesting is different areas of the body would be penetrated for different crimes, and you would think that perhaps the lesser crime would cause for non-lethal stab wounds, but nah. Yeah, they all still led to death.
28 stab wounds.
Alternatively, the impalement could be transversely performed, or you could take it from the front to the back or from the back to the front.
Pause.
Stab wounds would usually go through the abdomen, chest, or directly through the heart. In the Holy Roman Empire and elsewhere in Central and Eastern Europe, women who killed their newborn babies were placed in open graves and stakes were hammered into their hearts, particularly if their cases contained implications of witchcraft. Number 6. Crushed under an elephant. Well, as the name suggests, this form of punishment involved the convict's head being crushed under an elephant's hoof, similar to how a watermelon explodes under a hydraulic press machine. It was a very popular method in ancient India and also in other parts of Southeast Asia. Elephants were trained to kill their victims immediately or to torture them slowly over a period of time in this public spectacle. Sometimes, these elephants were made to just dismember the convict and not completely kill them. This punishment method was used for at least 2,000 years and is one of the most brutal and terrifying. Under the control of a mahout, elephants could inflict a slow and torturous death by crushing the convicted person's limbs one by one and tossing them about the ground, dragging them, or stabbing them with their tusks before finishing them off by crushing their skull. In the neighboring Sri Lanka, they would equip their elephants like some sort of customize your character video game. They were said to have attached the sharp blades to the elephant's tusks, which would rip the criminal into pieces. Meanwhile, in the former kingdom of Siam, present-day Thailand, elephants were trained to toss their victims up in the air, giving them a glimpse of heaven before sending them there. Number 5. Raped by a wild animal to death. Yeah, if you haven't lost your mind, this form of punishment to me and you would probably disgust you in many ways. But in the ancient empire, people often described it as a good show and considered this form of punishment as something stunning and spectacular. This was their form of fireworks. For the ancient empire, nothing makes a better show than seeing animals maul people to death, especially if it happens to be a woman. One of the most memorable times for this was that of poor Locusta, the lady who met her fate after being raped by a giraffe.
Bruh.
So, what did this lady do to deserve this form of punishment? Coming from ancient Roman times is the tale of a notorious woman who in 54 AD became the first serial killer ever to achieve infamy. The story is about 3 characters from Rome: Emperor Nero, his mother Agrippina, and Locusta, who was the woman who conspired with Agrippina to kill Nero's father, Emperor Claudius. It was an act of treason. Emperor Claudius was killed by Locusta, the lady who conspired with Agrippina, in a plot to crown his son Nero as the new emperor. To carry out the act, Agrippina got together with Locusta, who mastered the art of poisoning her victims. Agrippina and Locusta finally succeeded in killing Claudius with a batch of poisoned mushrooms, finally making Nero take over Claudius's place. Under Nero's reign, Locusta extended her pleasure of killing people, poisoning her victims at her will. Still working for Agrippina, Locusta maintained her position as an agent of death by poison. She was on a kill streak, getting contracts and assignments, essentially turning to her own version of 007. Now, during the fall of Nero, that's when Locusta finally met her 40th day. She was arrested and made to pay for her sins by having a giraffe rape her and then torn apart by wild animals. Number 4. The persecution of an inanimate object. Now, I tried to add things on this list that no other YouTuber has mentioned, and this one is just one I had to tell you all about. Yeah, as the title suggests, not even inanimate objects got a pass when it came to being persecuted. You may be asking, what did the inanimate object do? Well, in order to explain that, it's time for a quick story. Long ago, in ancient Greece of the great island of Thessos, there was a grumpy man who had a hatred for the famous Olympian Theagenes. His jealousy led him to anger, and because he couldn't take his anger out on Theagenes himself, he decided to attack his statue. Theagenes began whipping the statue. He would do this for many days until one day, the statue got fed up and decided to give him a bear hug by falling on top of him, squashing and killing him in the process. It's kind of comical how the statue of the man who he hated so much ended up being the reason for him losing his life. The man literally lost a fight with a statue from his arch nemesis. You can't take no L bigger than that. I guess the man had the last laugh though, because once the man's family found out the statue killed him, they formally prosecuted the statue by throwing it into the sea after being convicted of murder. There was also another instance where a bell was convicted of murder, but that's a story for another time. Number 3. Falling at your feet. As I was doing research, I realized humans just like to play games with these people. This method of death was more like trolling in a sense. Imagine being chained up and winched down a deep underground shaft. Picture yourself confined in a dark dungeon, and after hours of pain and suffering in the torture chamber, someone tells you to kiss a statue at the end of the room. If this was me, I'm not kissing a damn thing, just end my free trial. Anyways, victims would limp over to a bronze Virgin Mary, and they would lean forward to kiss the statue. It is at this moment when the trapdoor would open beneath them, and they would fall into a shaft lined with wheels and edged with spikes. The spikes turned as they fell, and they would be crushed and turned into human soup. Number 2. Sawed in half. Now, this method of execution was no magic trick of any kind. It was used in different parts of the world like the Roman Empire, Spain, and in parts of Asia. It was one of the many execution methods used by the Khmer Rouge of the infamous tool-slaying prison and killing fields. Guards would tie up bodies upside down on trees to saw the Chams, Vietnamese, captured foreigners, or suspected criminals in halves. In cases related to the Roman Empire Caligula, the sawing is said to be made transversely through the body. This method is similar to the ancient Chinese execution method of waist chopping. In the cases of Morocco, it is stated that the sawing was lengthwise, both from the groin upwards and from the skull downwards. Number 1. Death by boiling. It is recorded as one of the most gruesome and painful ways of punishing people. People in the early ages loved playing with their meat, not like that, or they're convicted, and naturally boiling the convicted in oil or water till the person died was a painful encounter. Though it was not as popular as other methods, as no direct show of blood was involved, it still had its own audience in Europe and Asia. Executions of this type were often carried out using a large vessel such as a cauldron or a sealed kettle filled with liquids such as water, oil, tar, or tallow, and a hook and pulley system. In England, the Ninth Statute passed in 1531, during the 22nd year of the reign of King Henry VIII, made boiling alive the prescriptive form of capital punishment for murder committed by poisoning, which by the same act was defined as high treason. Numerous people have also been boiled to death in Scotland. For example, with the consent of John Haraldson, the Blood Earl of Orkney, the Bishop of Caithness, Adam of Melrose, and a monk named Serlo are said to have been boiled to death by angry husbandmen in 1222 over the bishop's aggressive means of collecting tithes. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and remember, knowledge is power.
Knowledge.